This is a 1985 Honda Accord. And this is my friend Alanis King.
And this was the beginning of the midsize sedan as we know it.
Before this car, mid-size sedans were giant things with lots of steel and big chrome bumpers. But this car ushered in a new era of the mid-size sedan.
And today we're reviewing it and we're going to show you all of its quirks and features.
Before we get started, big news, this 1985 Honda Accord is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This Accord is a brilliantly preserved car, been in California its whole life, and the final model year of this Accord generation and the best trim level with fuel injection and extra power. And you can buy it on Cars and Bids. So once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to head over to the live auction for this Accord. You can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. All right, time for the quirks and features of the 85 Honda Accord, starting with one special detail about this car. It was purchased new in Modesto, California in 1985 and owned by the same little old lady. She probably wasn't old when she bought it, but for almost 40 years. So this car, lifetime in California. You can see the original old school blue license plate, and it's just cool to check out this car. The original Honda Accord, the first generation, came out in the late 70s, but to me, that was like a 70s car. It had chrome bumpers. This, the second gen, seemed more like a modern, like the genesis of the midsize sedan. Regardless, Honda just released the 11th generation Accord, so this is certainly an early one.
And this car's life on the West Coast is actually important because the Accord in general was the first car that Honda built in Marysville, Ohio. But they didn't build all of them there. So the cars that were supposed to go to the East Coast were built in Ohio. The cars that went to the West Coast were built in Japan, logistically. So this specific car was built in Japan, but in general, it's a pretty big deal that Honda started making cars over in America.
Now, this second generation Accord is, as you can imagine, a lot smaller than the current model. In fact, this car, this mid-size sedan, is only 173.6 inches long. It is 11 inches shorter than a new Honda Civic. Let alone the Accord. Cars have grown so much over the years.
Yeah, cars are huge these days, but back when this car came out, it was offered as a 4-door sedan or a 2-door hatchback. You could also get it in a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed auto. And we've got the auto here today because we are rolling luxuriously. No clutch pedals.
Actually, this car is indeed a luxurious model. It was the very final model year and the best version. All other Accords from this era had a carbureted 1.8-liter 4-cylinder that only made 86 horsepower. But for the final year of the second gen Accord, they came out with a fuel-injected model, the SEI. I stood for injection, and it had 100 horsepower, a far cry from the modern Honda Accord.
But I mean, that's still a lot of extra power.
It was big extra power. We'll see how it does on the road.
Yes, we will.
All right, moving inside for the quirks and features of the 85 Honda Accord. First thing you notice in here, it is 80s.
It is so boxy. It looks so cool and analog in here.
So old school analog, no like swoopy modern, no like nice wood screens.
No. The other thing you notice is we're very minimal here. You look at this steering wheel, there's no airbag in here. Steering wheels look so cool when there is no safety in there. It is just a wheel and it is flat.
Although with that said, there's more, because there's no screens, you do have a lot of buttons between the steering wheel and the center. Like it is a buttony car. This was the SEI after all. But it is very deeply, deeply 1980s in here. In one obvious giveaway, this ridiculous gear lever, which is just a post sticking up off the floor.
Absolutely.
You can't get away with this in modern cars.
No, but it's fantastic, and it's so old school to just press that gear lever and go down.
Clunk it on down.
Oh, fantastic. And I mean, you talked about the buttons. We have so many buttons in here, and I think this trip button was Doug's favorite.
This trip button is odd. It's like unusually large. I'm not sure why the trip odometer reset button is so big, but it indeed is so big.
You gotta be able to see it, Doug.
Speaking of buttons, the steering wheel has horn buttons, not one, not two, 4.
Why?
Road rage.
road rage. So if you get mad at someone in this car,
you got a lot of places.
You can hit every horn button and not feel guilty about it
beep,
because
beep, beep.
you're not pressing the horn 4 times. You're pressing the buttons.
Each button, individual button.
I think that's incredible. And you look up and we have this giant driver instrument cluster, which is, it's so clean. The fonts look so cool. Everything is very obvious. You know what you're looking at. You're looking at the speedometer. You're looking at all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's super nice. There's a lot of information there, but you don't get lost in it. You also have little indicator lights like oil filter, engine oil, and service. And you have buttons right below them where you can say, oh, I did that, and turn the light off.
How interesting is that? So like little light would light up when you need an oil filter, and then you replace it and you push that little thing.
Or if you're lazy and you procrastinate, you push it when you didn't fix it.
Because it's a lot easier to push the button. It's easier to push the button than replace the oil filter.
And it's completely gone. You don't have to worry about it until next time. You know, it's fine.
Here's an interesting feature. This little button on the left side of the gauge clusters looks like the car from above. It turns out it's like a check button. So you would press it and it would light up this car from above image in the gauge cluster. And if like a brake light was out or a door sensor was malfunctioning, it would show that in the, I mean, this car didn't have a screen.
No, it doesn't have a screen.
This is how they did stuff like that in the days before screens.
And what's so interesting is that little button icon that you would see, the car from above. In a modern car, you would press a button like that and it would give you a top-down 360 view so you can park.
Right.
Because cars are so much bigger today that you need help parking. But this is a small car, so we're fine. We can wiggle into spaces.
And do you notice just the sheer amount of window in this car? That's something that I always feel when I get into an 80s car because there's no, you know, belt lines have gotten higher for style, but also like pillars. Like this probably won't support the car. That era, like that wasn't important.
No, it doesn't matter. If something happens.
They needed a pillar to keep the roof on, but that was kind of it.
And then you look down below this belt line and you have this really cool design. I think it's very cool. We have these little perforated leather pieces and all this cute stitching.
I am surprised to see perforated leather and stitching on a 1985 Honda Accord.
It's luxury, Doug.
That is luxury.
It's luxury.
Another luxury touch of this car.
Okay.
Power sunroof, which opens very fast.
It's so fast.
Inexplicably fast, and the control is only for the driver. It's on to the left of the steering wheel. Basically, the driver's hard to even reach it. Like it's next to your knee. Like the passenger is completely shut out from any ability to open or close the sunroof.
I can't do anything.
Usually it's like in modern cars, like up here, so anybody can reach it. Not in this car.
I'm powerless.
How about the climate controls? Every button you press pops out another one.
I think that's beautiful.
It's like whack-a-mole.
Well, it's really satisfying.
It is very.
It's very satisfying.
Do you want to get in on this?
Yeah, I kind of do. I kind of do.
What if we press 2 at the same?
Okay, ready? Doug, 1, 2, 3.
Oh, it cancels out. It chooses whichever one. And speaking of climate controls, I like the settings. Low, medium, high, and flow.
What is flow, Doug?
What is flow? Well, I'm glad you asked.
Because we have an owner's manual. And I think another very cute quirk and feature is that our original owner of this car annotated the owner's manual.
We have
sticky notes, underlines. We have comments written in cursive.
Here's a great thing.
It's amazing.
In the table of contents, it has all the pages of stuff. So it says brakes 93. She's written 94.
94.
It wasn't 93 wasn't acceptable to her. That extra page.
And we have things circled. Whenever you have a note in the owner's manual that refers to multiple models, she has underlined SEI because that's the one. It feels so cool because it feels like you're looking in on someone's life. And to a lot of people, cars are just cars. Cars are things that get you somewhere. But to see her make little anecdotes and notes about her life with this car in the manual,
is kind of cool.
It's really cool, and it makes you feel a connection with not only her, but with the car.
How about the fact, when was the last time you saw an owner's manual that was only 111 pages?
111 pages. We don't need to go through 111 menus on the touch screen.
Right. My last car I got my Defender had a separate manual just for the infotainment. There was over 111 pages.
No. You're joking.
This car is, and of course it fades like an 80,
It's so cool. What does the flow button do?
Take a guess.
We're gonna figure it out. Flow from outside to inside. Like just, we're not doing the cabin air circulation. We got everything going from the outside.
That's a good guess.
And it's outside temperature.
That's a good guess. Here's the pages, ventilation, then the dash vents, then it gets into the controls.
Flow.
And you'll notice it points to recirc, and then it points to the function buttons, all the buttons.
Dang it, recirc.
All the buttons there, and then we get into if your car gets stuck. Doesn't explain flow. So
Okay, so we don't know what flow does.
no, I'm sure you're right though. Isn't that right?
That's a great question. I don't know. We're going with the flow.
One interesting thing, this car has power locks, power windows, and power mirrors.
Wow.
And a power sunroof. And leather.
Wow.
That stuff is real. And we have cruise control, and you know that because there's a large button in the center that says
cruise control. And it appears that there's a green light next to it, so I'm really excited to see how this works when we turn it on. We're just gonna go, green light, cruise control.
Wait, there's only one. Oh, there's more on the wheel. It's like, how do you, if there's only one button, how do you work it? There's a couple others. We're
gonna figure this out.
Such a simple and basic car, though. So interesting to be around this thing. Oh, one other interesting worth pointing out is the lock that locks the latches for the trunk and the fuel door. You know, this car came from like the gas crisis era, and so you could lock your fuel door, and if you didn't want your valet getting into your trunk, there's a literal lock down here. You twist, and then they can't open.
Well, no, that's another good point, because this car has a specific valet key.
Oh.
So they can't get into things like the trunk or things like that.
The days before valet mode in the screen.
You have a valet key, and the valet key is really interesting because the other keys have the little black casing over the end. The valet key does not. It's
the
bare.
only thing I can promise you is that Dottie, or the original owner, whatever her name was, who owned this car in Modesto, never took it to a valet. She wasn't pulling up to any high class.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
She was just too busy circling stuff in her owner's manual.
Which is so cool. Next, we move into the back seat, which, as you can see for Doug, was a little difficult.
It's a little tight back here. The definition of a mid-size sedan has changed over the years.
But here's a fun fact. If you lean back with the seat, you can kind of fit a little better.
That's true for her. It's true for me for headroom, but then my knees are still up against the front seat, and I've moved this front seat all the way forward.
We have the seat all the way forward, and Doug's knees are still on it. It's
fine.
Ridiculous.
It's fine. The new Accord, I think, is 2 feet longer than this car, and a lot of that space probably came from the back seat.
Probably came from making it more hospitable to someone like Doug. But I think we have a few interesting things back here, like how this is a sign of the time it was from. We have individual ashtrays. I have an ashtray. Doug has an ashtray.
And a cigarette lighter back here.
And a cigarette lighter. So if we're sitting in the back seat, we don't have to share an ashtray. I don't have to share his germs.
You know what's funny? There's not a lot of amenities back here, but ashtray. That was a priority. We got to get
Smoking
a lighter.
Was really important.
It was very important. You had to smoke.
Deal.
We don't have like climate vents back here. We don't even have a fold down armrest.
We don't need air conditioning.
Smoking, that was really a top priority in 1985.
Another interesting thing you see from back here is you get a rear view of these front seats, which have this single post headrest, and it's a flat rectangular headrest. It's very cool.
Yeah, it's definitely very old school, as is this netting. There's a cargo net behind, behind front seats. There's always like a storage pocket.
Yes.
Here it was like the dawn of the storage pocket. They were like, I got an idea, and so it's like a net, like you would catch shrimp.
I don't
in the
know what
ocean.
I'm gonna put. I'm gonna put my modern cell phone in here.
Wow!
And you know what? It fits.
New meets old.
New meets old. It's beautiful.
Other than that, there's not an enormous amount of interesting stuff. You do still have leather back here, and like a weird amount of stitching and perforated seats. It seems too nice back here.
We also have this little C-pillar with a weird fur on it, just in case you need some sensory petting on this car for some reason.
That's like the only cloth in the whole car, though, because I guess the floor mats. But otherwise, it's like all leather. I got a headliner. Yeah. This is a pretty standard back seat. You have a center seat belt, although it's only a lap belt. The regulation for the 3-point center seatbelt was laid much later. It wasn't. We're lucky we even have a center seatbelt. We don't care about safety, to be honest. We're lucky we have a passenger mirror. That wasn't mandated on cars from this era. And Civics didn't have it. There's a Civic in my neighborhood. The woman bought new, same deal as this. No passenger mirror from the factory.
Doug, they were focused on the ashtrays. They were focused on the ashtrays.
2 cigarette lighters, 3 ashtrays, but no passenger mirror.
No safety.
1980s Honda. One other interesting thing you can see in the back, the third brake light on the rear shelf. The third brake lights became mandated in the mid-80s. Alana said she wrote an article about third brake lights. Alana, tell us when they became mandated.
I also said after I wrote about the article about that, I forgot because that was 6 years ago, and Doug went, "Oh, Lannis, what was in that story that you told me you specifically forgot was in it?" All I remember is that the third brake light expert. I am the one to talk to. All I remember is that it's kind of a psychological thing. So seeing that triangle of lights really helps you recognize the fact that the person in front of you is braking, whereas if you only have the two down low, not as effective, as Doug can attest to.
I feel like the third brake light was useful, but it's interesting how they just kind of stuck it in here. Like, third brake lights are now so integrated into the design of a car, but back then they were like, oh, we got a regulation? Let's just stick some plastic in the window.
It's so true.
It is also true that you forget stuff. Like, I film these videos.
Yeah, I know!
I film these videos, people come up to me like, hey man, how do you open the whatever and the whatever again? And I'm like, this video was 4 years ago. I forgot 38 minutes after. No recollection.
Doug is great at what's true for me is not true for anybody else. So I'm going to put a Lannis on the spot.
Well, you should have remembered. The article was only 6 years ago.
I should have remembered. It's my fault.
And next we move outside the 1985 Accord, where there are some interesting quirks and features, starting with one of my very favorites, the dealer-installed accessories.
There are lots of them.
Old Dottie, when she got this car, she got taken for a ride. The pinstriping is my favorite.
I love the pinstriping. It's so cute.
It is cute. You notice how it makes some twists, little diamonds like on the hood and on the sides. There's little diamonds again, and you know they sold that to her as like, this isn't just
fancy.
pinstriping. This is high-end pinstriping.
With diamonds.
Diamond pinstriping, and she probably
Huge
was like,
deal.
oh.
Love it.
And it's not just that. Fog lights in front, which surely was some dealer-installed accessory. They convinced her.
And they hang down from the bumper. It looks like a rally car. It looks like rally lights on
Dottie
it.
was like, I need rally lights. No, they obviously they convinced her, like, hey, it gets foggy here in Modesto, son. You know you want these.
Yeah,
You're gonna need
for sure.
them.
You're going to need to see. We have the mud flaps.
We got mud flaps on here. Again, hey, you never know when you might go on a dirt road.
Never know. It's going to be off-roading because we're rallying.
And there's this like chrome trim on the wheel arches and stuff that like wasn't factory that they kind of stuck on. There's probably like $1,000 in $85 of like stuff they tacked on.
But that's what they do, right?
That's what they would do back then. They would be like, hey, you need this. They probably sold her undercoating and all this other, rust-proofing.
And we talked about the chrome, which is actually really cool because we're going from this era of chrome bumpers and chrome. The chrome has kind of transformed into this little tasteful accent, and it looks really beautiful on this car. It's just thin piping all around. It looks really nice.
Yeah, the previous Accord, the 70s one, was like a lot of chrome. And you're right, like the chrome that wasn't dealer installed, the one that the factory left up, they still felt like we can't go away from the chrome just yet, but we can change it. We can make it like, we can lessen it. And that's one of the reasons why I think this was like the first modern midsize to me, because like it was the leaving behind of some of those 70s tropes and like moving on to like, okay, this is kind of the modern era where plastic and like body colored bumpers started to become like part of the experience.
When we talk about modern era, we also talk about wheel size. Typically, when you buy a nice car today, the nicer the car is, the more you spend, the bigger the wheels get. The Lamborghini Urus, you can get 23, 24 inches on that thing. Do you know how big these wheels are? 13! We have 13-inch wheels.
This is a 13-inch wheel on this car. And this is the top trim. And the owner of this car told us that he thinks these wheels were SEI specific.
Ooh.
I think the base cars had Steelies still.
Oh! And here we are with our 13-inch alloys. Oh.
Yeah.
We are in fancy land over here. And another really fancy thing is, let me tell you, if you buy this car and you go to Cars and Coffee, go park by the C4, C5 Corvettes.
Where's this going?
And you pop this hood and it comes this way.
Yes.
So you could really invade the American muscle and pop your hood up the exact same way.
E30 BMW M3s, just like an E34, or E28 was like this. And yes, American muscle. And the 1985
Honda Accord SEI.
Last interesting thing about this car, speaking of opening stuff, the trunk is quite large. It is actually surprisingly big. And it's one of the things about sedans from this era. There was a demand for big trunks. Like, you were coming out of the 70s when all the cars were huge, and like, for some reason, car size back then, like how cool you were was kind of measured by how big your trunk was. Like, you tried to, yeah, it's got look at this thing, you can get 10 golf bags back here.
Wow.
And so they needed to preserve that, even as cars got more economical with 4-cylinder engines and smaller, and so they did. And I think it came at the expense of rear seat. Like, we're sitting in the back seat, like, hunched in. Meanwhile, the trunk...
we need room for the trunk.
You can get, like, 10 golf bags back there.
You can get 4 people in there. I mean, we still measure trunks by golf bags. The McLaren GT, the big brag on that is you can fit a golf bag in a McLaren. But I asked Doug permission to get in the trunk because I think the best measure of how big a trunk is how many people you can fit in it.
That is interesting. All right, driving the 1985 Honda Accord SE. And
we have to be really careful here, you know, because this car has so much power that we don't want to just glue to the seat while we're trying to talk to all of you. The reason this is so special, because it's well preserved, is because so many people did not preserve
That's right, because this wasn't that cool. It's not a cool car objectively, but every year there's more Accord attrition. It becomes cooler that there's one left like this. The funny thing about this car, so this car actually predates both of us. What year were you born? 95?
I was born in 95.
I was born in 88. This car's in 85. I mean, this was before... But I grew up, and you grew up, I mean, in cars in the 90s and the late 80s and early 2000s, there was sort of some similar stuff. You can see the genesis of where it kind of comes when you drive this car, but it feels very different in my mind from a modern midsize sedan. It is lower, it is clearly smaller, there's so much more glass. You're clearly in a different era car.
We're right here, I can see the road, it's right in front of me.
Yeah, right in front. The hood is short. I mean, it's a small engine.
So short.
This car is closer in length to a Honda Fit than it is to a new Civic, let alone an Accord. And also just all the glass, that helps too. That's the one safety feature you have over modern cars. You can see everything. There's really no fear of hitting something you don't notice.
But if you do hit something, there is no airbag.
Yep.
I'm actually really enjoying just being in here and feeling how this car drives. I think it's really interesting because you can feel the road below you, but it's not distracting. You know, you can feel the little bumps and little cracks, but you're not just shaking with all of it.
It was supposed to be like a nice car that families would own back then, but it is interesting how much standards have changed over the years.
How's the steering feel? How's the pedal feeling? Give me a description here in the passenger seat.
You know, the early days of power steering were just not kind to steering feel.
That's so fair.
This was not, though, you know, there was no driver's car mantra here. That was not their goal. Like, look at this. Like, I'm just steering 6 inches in any direction.
Going like this.
The only thing that you're seeing, the car rocks a little, but it's not going anywhere. But that was kind of how it was. I mean, that's how most 60s and 70s cars were too. I would never guess this was an 85 sitting in it, just because it kind of drives like most 90s cars too. Okay. Like the mid 80s were the beginning of an era, that the plastic era, the over-assisted power steering era, that ran for 10, 12, 15 years, and the cars did not grow dramatically in terms of benefit since then. But it drives relatively modern, considering that it has its roots. They probably started the design of this car in the late 70s.
Okay, floor, ready?
Oh my, it didn't even downshift. This is gonna be a long accelerator. This is 100 horsepower working! This car probably only weighs 2,900 pounds, my guess.
Yeah.
And so 100 horsepower shouldn't be that slow. Oh man. So suspension is soft, but what I was gonna say is, it shouldn't be that slow, but the trans does it too. I mean, a 4-speed torque converter auto was just not. The funny thing is, the owner of this car told us that he thinks that SEIs were only offered auto. At the time, it was like a luxury benefit to have an automatic transmission. It was whoa. Now you would do in fuel-injected high-performance version, of course you would do a manual. But at the time, it was whoa, an auto and all these nice features. My final conclusion on this car is, it's just nostalgia. It's a pure nostalgia thing. It's amazing to see it preserved like this. It's not an amazing car to drive, but it's very interesting to get in this and see where the midsize sedan was pre-us.
And not only do we have the nostalgia from Honda, from the 80s, from all of that, we also have the nostalgia from the owner, which I think is just really special.
I mean, if this had fallen into second, third, fourth owners, it would have gotten torn up.
No.
But the fact that one person had it for so long, it was kept
It's really special.
Yeah.
So that was the 1985 Honda Accord, the early days of a car we know so well today.
It's interesting to see this car and see how midsize sedans used to be, and see the Accord from before we both were born, sort of the genesis of the midsize sedan as we know it. And you can buy this Accord on Cars and Bids.
And now it's time to give it a Doug score!
And the Doug score is here, 38 out of 100, which places the Accord last in this group, although that's no real surprise. It's rare that I review cars like this Accord, and all the other cars on this list are either more enthusiasty, like the Eclipse GSX and the Maserati Biturbo, or more luxurious, like the Nissan Maxima and Mitsubishi Sigma. Regardless, the 1985 Honda Accord is an interesting relic, a true throwback to the days of the old-school midsize sedan, and a real reminder of my youth, and it was amazing to check one out in such decent condition.